The earlier black people or African people all over the world realize that we have nothing in this world except Africa, the better for everybody. All right, let's talk about the biggest scam in the world and how you are the victim. This video is about how Western media or American media brainwashes us about our continent, about Africa. Did you know the biggest propaganda machine in the world isn't some secret government agency? It's the news and the movies we watch every day, especially those from America, just like this ones. They do not just control what we see, they also control how we think. And when it comes to Africa especially, their goal is simple. They make sure you see a continent in chaos, never in power. Before we even continue, what is propaganda? Propaganda is information, especially information that is biased or misleading in nature, in order to promote a political cause or a point of view. Now that you know that, ask yourself this: when was the last time you saw like genuine good news about Africa? Like a technology boom in Africa, or scientific breakthrough, or even how the economy in Africa is rising? When? Exactement. Because if you see Africa thriving, then America loses its excuse to interfere in Africa, and they cannot have that. So basically what I mean by they will lose their excuse to interfere in African situation is because they justify their interference politically, economically, and militarily in Africa by portraying Africa as weak, in constant crisis, and unstable. So if people see Africa as thriving and strong and capable, then they're going to lose their motive to interfere in Africa. And that is why the world have like a preconceived notion of the black skin. We are either seen as dirty or criminals. Even the Asian countries see the black skin as problematic and often resist black immigration. So to all the Westerners and Asians seeing this right now, if you have any negative feelings towards black people, especially Africans, just know the Western media is the reason for your ignorance. Because a strong Africa equals to weak West. Weak West, strong Africa. And there's this thing that people always fail to understand. The West has never helped Africa, and they don't plan to help us anytime soon. For example, just recently, some of our brothers and sisters trying to escape the harsh conditions created by the West in Africa to get a better life out there. The EU paid some of the Arab countries, these Arab countries that feel like they're not African countries, to catch, humiliate, and send back Africans to their countries. That's what has been happening. So they don't even plan to help us anytime soon, and they have never helped us. They have never helped Africa. I'll say this again: the West has never helped Africa. It has controlled Africa, first through colonization and then through economic warfare. The IMF, the World Bank, aid organizations, they are just new chains with fancy names. Because tell me how you say you're helping somebody but you expect them to pay you $25 billion every year. That's the amount of money that Africa pays in debt every year. Because tell me how you're helping and 80% of Africa's raw materials is owned by foreign corporations. It's owned by you. The earlier black people or African people all over the world realize that we have nothing in this world except our continent, except Africa, the better for everybody. Because literally we have nothing. Even in Africa, they own everything. We own nothing. And if you don't know, the role of the media in this situation is to make us never even think of asking why things are the way they are, why we don't have anything, why we get to pay so much money to IMF, the World Bank, and we own and we have nothing. Have you ever noticed how only certain leaders in Africa are labeled as corrupt? The ones who refuse to play ball with the West: Muammar Gaddafi of Libya, Robert Mugabe, Zimbabwe, Thomas Sankara, Burkina Faso, Patrice Lumumba, Laurent Gbagbo, Ivory Coast. But the ones who let America and the rest of the West exploit their countries are seen as progressive: Paul Kagame, Rwanda, Alassane Ouattara, Ivory Coast, Felix Tshisekedi of the DRC, and Yoweri Museveni of Uganda. So I hope you can see the pattern is clear. If you keep Africa's resources for Africans, you are labeled or you are known as a corrupt dictator. If you let the West exploit your country, you are seen as a progressive reformer. And this is why most of the resource-rich nations in Africa are the most unstable. Not necessarily because of bad governance, but because the West will never allow independent leaders. They will never allow independent leaders. They always want to control something. On the one hand, the media is calling Gaddafi a brutal dictator. On the other hand, the media is praising Saudi Arabia despite all the human rights abuses in that country. So at this point, you should realize that it's not about democracy anymore. Fuck that. Fuck democracy. It's about obedience. And that is how the game is played. The West does not want to help Africa, and it doesn't want anybody to help Africa. Let's look at this angle. The Cold War wasn't just bombs and spies. It was a war over perception. And during the Cold War, the Soviet Union was the villain. And because of this, Patrice Lumumba had to die because he was considered a communist. And if you actually think the Cold War ended, think again. It's never ended. It just got a new target, China. And again, Africa is just a pawn in the story. But I wonder who is going to die this time around. Traore? I am sure you've heard it so many times in Western media. China this, China that, China this, China that. That's the new target. And I think one of the reasons why they are a target is because they are trying to help Africa in their own way, at least. And that is the problem. America does not want to help Africa, but then China is trying to help Africa, building roads, building railways, building hospitals. But suddenly the problem is China. The US does not want to help Africa. The US also does not want China to help Africa because we are more valuable as brokies, as broke people, as poor people, as people with no value. That's our value, no value. It was never about saving Africa. It was always about controlling it. Now you know. American media isn't just biased. It's a weapon that controls what you see, what you feel, and who you think deserves justice. But I have news for you people. Africa is not a lost cause. It's not a charity case. In fact, Africa is a global powerhouse that the West wants to ignore. Because if you control the story, you control the world. In conclusion, the perception of American media as a tool of propaganda from an African perspective is deeply rooted in its historical and ongoing framing of narratives that prioritize Western interests while marginalizing African voices. Western media deliberately chooses what to report about Africa, often focusing only on negative stories like war, corruption, and poverty, while ignoring progress and success. This one-sided portrayal shapes the global perception of Africa and Africans as weak and chaotic, making it easier for Western powers to justify interfering in African affairs, thereby limiting Africa's ability to control its political and economic future. So, what can we do? Start questioning everything. Next time you see a news story about Africa, a spy movie, a war movie, or any movie from the West, America in particular, ask yourself, who benefits from this narrative? Who's being erased? Who is being silenced? Because at the end of the day, propaganda isn't just lies. It's the stories they choose to tell and the stories they choose to ignore. The dominance of these propaganda narratives highlights the urgent need for a paradigm shift in global media practices, one that embraces diverse, equitable, and authentic storytelling. So basically, by giving more visibility to African perspectives and questioning the powerful institutions that spread misleading information about Africa, we can help break the cycle of bias and allow more truthful and diverse representation of the continent. It's time to see the world for what it really is. So like, share, and follow if you are done letting the media think for you.